Kris is again our founder faculty, and he's come for many sessions, including a session on health technology, and as mentor and expert for many of the sessions. Kris is co-founder of Baylis Medical Company, a leading developer, manufacturer, and distributor of specialized medical devices. Kris was also the president of OME Group Consultants, a company he co-founded and developed to become a leading national shared service provider. OME Group Consultant was sold to Ernst & Young in August 2011. Kris has built up his company on completely bootstrapping model to take it to a huge success level now. He was last year chosen as Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year. We are privileged to have him. Please welcome Kris.
First of all, it's a couple of tough acts to follow, but I'll do the best I can. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of the next stage after your business plan. Supposedly you've written it, you have some level of funding, and things have got started to whatever extent you have. And business in general will go from stage to stage. It's never a linear progression. It tends to be stepwise functions. It will be progressive from stage to stage. And I want to talk a little bit about how the plan is put into operation and some of the reporting structures that will help you get along that. I'm going to talk a little bit about who Baylis Medical, just to give a little bit of context, and talk about the concept of business plan versus living document that other speakers also touched upon. And one of the key things I'd like to talk about is the performance measurement tools that can be used to drive your business forward, and why they're necessary and how they should be doing it now that you have a plan in place, and to help you implement the strategy and measurement tools that help you get there. And a concept of some sort of balanced scorecard, something that we use ourselves to help monitor our company. And I'll try to do a conclusion. We can certainly take questions anytime you like. So as Lynn said, Baylis Medical got started roughly 25 years ago as importer distributors of specialized devices. And since then, we kind of morphed into developing and manufacturing our own devices that we sell around the world now. And we specialize in what's called interventional medicine, or medicine to treat you, medical devices to treat you without surgical procedures. So we've been around 25 years, got a little over 130 employees. We have facilities in Montreal and Toronto where we do manufacturing, R&D, and so forth. And we have sales offices across Canada and US. Okay, so first of all, why drive your business now that written a business plans? There's a good quote from Benjamin Franklin: drive thy business, not let it drive thee. You need to drive your business with a purpose, articulate your vision, and what you're heading towards that. Not let things happen to you as they come along. Because as you go forward, many things happen along the way. But you need to go with a purpose and forward and be able to drive your business forward. So business plan for operation, or what we call living document, really refers to business plan that differs from the plan that you may have done for funding or for external consumption. These business plan for operation or living documents tend to be more used for internal focus, internal use. They tend to be shorter, more action-oriented, more to what you're going to do and how you can actually implement that and make that happen. But the key thing is that internal plans and external plans should be totally consistent. If you're trying to say something to outside world and doing something different, people will pick up on that before you can even speak your mouth, because the investors, other folks will pick that up instantly that you're saying one thing but doing something else. So the plan should be consistent, but the internal plans are meant for consumption and put in operation on a daily basis. The other aspect is that the plans for operation really need to address each aspect of what you're actually functionally doing to realize the vision. So as Ronnie was going through his business plan, you have financial modeling, business strategy, or competition, so on. Now as you kind of get to the operation, you really need to break that down to nuts and bolts of how you're going to realize the strategy. So for instance, you may need to do product development. So you need a plan for how you're going to develop a product or service. Okay, if you're going to be hiring people, how are you going to hire? What's your strategy for skill set that you're going to need? For instance, the strategy we use is we hire a lot of new grads and we train them up. They tend to be very cost efficient way of doing it. But on the other side, we don't get a lot of expertise someone may have, but it's a model we can afford, and we learn how to manage that, put systems around that. So that's our HR strategy, but that's may not be captured in business plan, but something you need to capture, articulate, and make that happen. Similarly, you need plans for your operations or manufacturing or whatever your service delivery mechanism is, compliance, regulatory, IP, and there's the umpteen more that you need to manage. So you really need a plan for each aspect of them on how you can articulate that and make that happen. These are the nuts and bolts of making things happen. Without that, your strategy is, what the strategy is a piece of paper that you haven't been able to articulate. So these are nuts and bolts of how to get things done, and you need to do that on a kind of action-oriented basis. One of the other aspects I'm going to get into very heavily now is that having developed an action plan for each major aspects of your business, measurements of your results is very essential. So often you got a business plan, now you have action plan for your business there, each of the aspects. Key thing is how you're going to measure yourself to see what's happening. Otherwise, times can go by, like 6 months can go by, or a year can go by really fast without actually achieving a strategic vision, or you may realize a year later that you're heading in a different direction than what you had actually anticipated. Or you may realize that you achieved your sales, but your company is still going bankrupt because you didn't collect money from your clients, okay, or the receivables issue came up. So any number of things can get in the way. So this means, so how are you going to measure yourself to see you're articulating your strategy and how you're going forward? I want to talk a little bit about why do formal measurements, how often should you report, and what should you be measuring on, and how should you be articulating that. So first off, this is my favorite quote from Jack Welch in his book, Winning, right? So you get what you measure. This is a universal truth of and the different cultures have different aspects of that. You will get what you measure. If you're going to measure sales, you're going to get sales. If you measure receivables, you'll get receivables. So the key thing is, if you don't measure anything, you won't get anything. So you get what you measure. So it's critical that we implement a plan on what you want to measure, how you want to measure it, how often you want to measure that. The other truth is, other quote I got from Peter Drucker was that you can't manage what you can't measure. So if you're not actually measuring something, you can't actually manage that. Okay, whether it be articulating your strategy of product development or market penetration or export, whatever have you not, if you aren't able to measure that, you aren't able to manage it. If you can't manage it, you certainly will not be able to articulate that and make that happen. So one of the key things is how often should you be reporting, or how often should you be managing this? So in a business situation, as you're all running your business, whether you're trying to raise capital or articulating the story, is that you'll have kind of what we call high touch points with your team. You could be talking on an hourly basis, or certainly on a daily basis, you're going to be speaking about what happened to this client or what happened in this situation. You're going to be dealing with that on an ongoing basis. And often we see that as sufficient means of communicating with our team. So we've seen that I talk to Joe X, or talk to every member of my team once a day or once an hour, or I'm emailing them 50 times a day, that you have very high touch points. And you think that's the means of communication, and that is sufficient going forward. But what I say is that high frequency touch points are often not sufficient to see the forest from the trees. So you're going to be speaking to them on a daily basis, but you're talking about an issue that you can deal with in 2 hours or 1 day or 1 week. These are kind of referred as high touch points. And if this is only communication you have with the team, you're going to be seeing a lot of trees, but you won't get the entire picture of where you're headed as an organization. And then something can catch you by strike, or you may be going the wrong direction, just not know it. So there's often high touch points that you do on a daily basis will not be sufficient to drive you forward. So the kind of the performance measurements that should be done is, in addition to daily or hourly or emails that you're doing, that you have weekly kind of communication level, which will refer to things like key customer deliverables or product development sense, like we need to get this product developed, or this stage of the product articulated, or we need to get this permit by this week. So these will be actions that we completed in relatively short duration. So something we can complete in a week or 1 day will be the things that you speak about on a weekly basis. And this may itself require a small meeting or a coffee, or having a 15-20 minute meeting to look at key deliverables for 1 week. But in addition to that, one of the key things, like articulated, is that on a monthly basis, need to do a more formal measurement system that should take place. And at this time, you look at all your key performance indicators, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And it should be attended by all senior and all key staff. So you're looking at it on a monthly basis, what is happening to your business and which direction it's headed in. And it's not to do with the day-to-day deliverables or issues that need to be resolved today, but kind of in a more comprehensive way, what's happening on a monthly basis that you can go forward with.
Do you have any software you would recommend to keep track of all these activities?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about a couple of tools that you can use to, and what tools that you can use, and certainly you can implement in a number of different softwares, or even a homemade system will do. The key thing is to look at different periodicity of how you're communicating with the team and articulating your goals. There's kind of high touch points, you have weekly aspects and a monthly aspect. And at least in our view, as the business grows and you have a kind of strategy that'll take more than a few months to implement, monthly touch base, kind of the performance measurements is very critical to go forward. So on a monthly basis, parameters that you want to look at is, first of all, items related to survival, like cash flow, okay, or delivering a product to a customer service that you can actually bill on. Second thing you want to look at is your key strategic indices, like which way are you headed, and is your plan is getting you there or not getting you there. And one of the key things I want to look at is what's called, kind of generically referred to as key performance indicators, or KPIs. You see that term being used quite often. And I'll talk more about the KPIs, but the KPIs will tend to change over time. These aren't a fixed set of entities. So when you're first starting off, maybe you have one set of indicators you're looking at. Start selling your product or service, initial stages, maybe second set of indicators, and as you mature, maybe another set of indicators that come in, and things may change depending on what the flux of the business is. But the key thing is that KPIs must be evaluated against a predefined criteria. So you must know in advance what is your goal for each of the indicators, and are you actually achieving towards that. So you don't want to have something that you're changing as you go along to say, well, we didn't get that, so let's not worry about that. We'll make our indicator something else. You want to have it against predefined goals. So for instance, as an example, if you're in a cash crunch situation, which every business is, you'll have targets for receivables. You want to say you want to receive 90% of your funds from customers within 45 days. So that should be kind of etched in stone almost that you measure yourself against. So now if the receivables have gone to 90 days or 60 days, that should ring a bell. And not just to say, well, we'll just make it 60 days, but to say, okay, well, what does that mean to us now? So these indicators should be predefined that you measure against, because the rest of your plan will rely on these things occurring or happening at that time. So key performance indicator is a measure reflecting how an organization is doing with respect to a given key performance, given aspect of your performance. And key activities needed to achieve a strategic objective. So you want to have a finite set of indicators that you're monitoring. This is called key indicators. And these indicators have to drive your strategic growth. So that they must help you go towards what your goal is. And a mix of KPIs will provide a comprehensive picture of your entire organization. Okay, so they must reflect on financials, human resources, product development, operations. So set indicators should give you indication of kind of picture of the whole company on where things are and where things are headed. And as I mentioned, the KPIs have to be tied to strategic objectives, which are articulated, or vision statement, as Sarah was saying. So and you can break these indicators down into what we would call critical success factors with a corresponding performance matrix. So for instance, one of the criteria could be increased customer satisfaction, if you're in fact selling a service, if you got that out. So then a measurement might be what's called a net promoter score, meaning that how many people will actually promote you versus trying to give you negative spin or being neutral against business, the concept of net promoter score. Or for instance, if you're looking at product development stage, one of your key objectives in the startup could be product development, and maybe looking at R&D efficiency, then product development scheme or strategies that help you develop the product will be your key performance or the corresponding performance matrices that you want to use against that. So one a concept of keeping track of these KPIs in a comprehensive way to look at the entire company is a concept called balanced scorecard that you may have come across previously. The concept that was developed by Dr. Kaplan and Norton at Harvard, I think sometime in the 1990s or so. And it's really a means of transferring a strategic plan into a set of measurable, actionable plan that you can put in place for your company as a whole. So what it really gives you tools to say what should be done and measures you along that line to say are you actually achieving that on a regular basis. There's one thing to have a plan that says I'm going to do this, and you need to action plan. Are you doing that, and are you actually getting there by measuring yourself towards that? So it gives you kind of a concept or framework to execute and measure your strategy. And the key thing is that it views the organization as a whole. So it allows you to develop a set of matrices, collect data, and analyze the data with respect to some strategic imperative that have been predefined for you to achieve that. It's a quote from Dr. Kaplan: measure what you want, not what you can measure. It's a very subtle part is that often we'll measure what's data that's readily available to us, but that may or may not be driving our strategic imperative or the strategic value we want to deliver. So we want to measure what's going to drive you forward and put in mechanisms to collect the data as opposed to measuring what's readily available. So the balanced scorecard, what you hope to get out of that is improve your organizational performance by measuring what is important, focus on drivers of your future performance, and align your strategic imperative work people do on a day-to-day basis, and improve communication along your team members. So you have a plan, strategy, vision statement, mission statement, whatnot, and this gives you means of breaking that down to actions and make sure the entire organization is heading towards that. So you don't have people trying to do different things, but at a given time in your business life, you have key strategies that have to be implemented to take it to the next stage. It gives you means of getting there, and more importantly, measure to say which way you're headed. Because if you're measuring and not heading the way you need to go at, you can always course correct. You can adjust, but that can only be done if you're measuring and actually articulating that. So this is a kind of simplified version of the balanced scorecard. And what the balanced scorecard requires is that you look at 4 key aspects of business. First is finance. And finance could be related to survival in a startup sense, or have I raised enough to get things going, or if you're running a company like burn rate or profitability, kind of looks at financial matrices. Second aspect is your customer, and whether it be related to customer satisfaction or on-time deliveries, whatnot, so aspects related to your customer. Third one is kind of related to learning and delivery, which is with respect to human resources. We just all speak about people are most important aspects. What are we actually doing to learn and develop ourselves as an organization? Fourth one is processes. What processes have you put in place that are driving you forward? Something Sarah was speaking very heavily about. So it looks at your internal processes that take you forward, so you go beyond an individual. To kind of follow up what the gentleman was saying, that human resources is the most important thing. It is and it isn't, because your human resources, your talent can walk out the elevator every day, and it does. Your real kind of value that you have is the processes that people can implement, so knowledge doesn't walk out, it stays there with you and grows. So processes speaks to that, is what processes are we implementing that will take us forward and make us grow, and not be totally dependent on single individual or single set events or single customer that may be focused on. Here's it's a little bit busy chart. I'll try to walk you through that. This is kind of the central aspect of the balanced scorecard, that in the center of that is what you really have your vision and strategy. Which way, what is your ultimate goal for next year, or your vision for long term, which way are you headed, and your strategy for getting there. Then you look at 4 aspects that are all interrelated to each other. It's financial. Then you'll have key financial indicators or KPIs related to that. So in this example, to succeed financially, how should we appeal to our shareholders? It could be kind of objective measures that we have related to that. And clearly the financials are going to be related to your customer. These customers are going to be buying something from you, thus generating cash. And then the customers are inherently linked to your internal business processes, because your processes have to deliver a product or service that they're paying for. And they're all interrelated by learning and growth of your organization, so your organization could grow and go to a new level. So balanced scorecard, in essence, forces you to measure key performance indicators along four points, which is financial, customer, internal processes, and learning and growth of the organization. And the idea is that you have key performance indicators for each of those aspects. You map them out in advance and measure yourself on a monthly basis. And you can see if you're doing this on a monthly basis, you'll get a picture of the company as a whole. You're not looking at a single aspect of that. And these kind of communications cannot take place daily, so they take far too long and be too cumbersome to do it. Doing them once a year is, you'll miss the entire year of doing something or being able to course correct yourself if you waited too long. But if you don't do this and you're only having daily or weekly communication, you won't be able to look at your company as a whole on enough of a periodicity to get a sense of that. So the idea is that look at your company on a monthly basis, on some level of scorecard by measuring your key performance indicators against each of your key drivers, which are drivers being, will almost always be financial, customer, internal business processes, and learning and delivery mechanisms.
Excuse me. Could you give us a couple of examples of internal business measures and KPIs?
Yeah, so absolutely. So internal business processes would refer to things that allow you to deliver your service. So for instance, if you're manufacturing, for instance, what is your working process like? How long does it take you to produce a product? Or if you're delivering a software service, how often are you late? How long does it take to deliver features? So these are the internal processes that are internal measures related to kind of guts of your business. Okay? And this could be not only customer facing, like a delivery of product, but also be internally oriented. For instance, we need to hire 5 engineers per month or 5 this year. How many have you done? So things that refer to kind of the what's a good word, like internal, like kind of the nuts and bolts of your running, like a lot of raw engineering or a lot of raw stuff. But without that, nothing happens. You can have a great strategy, great product, but if you aren't able to ship to the customer on time, you're not collecting money and you'll go bankrupt just as fast as if you had a bad product. Okay, so the internal process can kill you, and just as bad as anything else, and dead is dead. Doesn't really matter how you got there. So any one of those things can go down. Often when you hear in newspapers that companies gone bankrupt, it's often related to the inventories were too high, okay, or the receivables they weren't in check, or they had some rogue operation or something. But any number of the internal processes can kill you fast as a bad strategy or bad product. So the internal processes kind of have to keep you aligned towards that. Especially true in any regulated business. If you're like we're in medical device business, internal processes are extremely consuming, but without that we can't ship our product, and FDA or Health Canada can shut us down. So any compliance business will have a huge requirements for that. Yes,
just a question about your success with this tool. Is there any example you could think of where you had to make a course correction and you've gotten an outcome that aligned to your strategic strategy?
I'll go through an example of this other companies where they took this idea, and I'll go through our own example. So they took this, and I show this as an example that even though we speak about looking at these 4 parameters in a kind of interrelated manner, a number of different things you're looking at, this is a simplified version of a company's scorecard where they're looking at financial related to the sales or whatnot, looking at the customer satisfaction criteria and customer perceived or the supplier. So they took their number of key things and said, at this time in our life, 4 key things are critical. And in our own business, we use this concept quite regularly, and it changes almost sometimes month to month, or at least on a year-to-year basis. Things you look at, for instance, days to receivables, where your work and process inventory of number of new products introduced, or number of complaints that were reported, and on a trend basis, you can make a sense of where that's headed. So we use it quite a bit, and by looking at it data on a monthly basis, you can see the trend, and then you can actually correct yourself to say, look, our receivables are always going up, so we need to do something about that. Then once you know that, at least you can put mechanisms in place to try to manage that. But if you're not measuring it, you won't actually know what's happening, and you can't course correct accordingly. You could have matrices that are unaligned. So for instance, you may say aspects on financial aspect that are totally inconsistent with your customer aspects of things. The matrix could be unaligned. You could have overly aggressive targets that are unrealistic. Then you're trying to chase something that may not be possible. And one that's kind of the highest level risk, I think, is risk of data manipulation. That if you aren't actually achieving it, people will find a way of manipulating the data to make it somehow comply with that, or change the criteria of something to comply with. So you need to make sure that you don't fall in a pitfall of data manipulation where you're kind of measuring the wrong things or inputting the wrong set of data to look at that. So in kind of conclusion, it says that business plan for operations are living documents that tend to be action-oriented with performance measurements. And measuring performance on a monthly basis is critical to align your strategy to your operations. And balanced scorecard provides a clean framework to do that, but clearly it's not the only framework to use. The key thing is to have strategy broken down into operations and measure your operations against a predefined indicator, and have set of limited number of indicators, kind of give you a picture of the whole company, but driving your strategy forward at that stage of business you're at. That's kind of the conclusion, since I can certainly answer any questions.
Do you have some people in your team who is helping you to basically to keep track of all the scores?
Yeah, you would have, like for instance, we would have a controller who will do the financial aspect of things, and you have our operations manager responsible for manufacturing and so on, so they'll give us data on that part.
So you create the system. Like let's say you create the system. So when you bring, let's say, accountant, you're gonna say, well, look, this is what I'm looking for. I want you to measure this every month. Or how would you do it?
Yeah. So okay, give you an example. So if you're looking at, say, looking at financial aspect, or say even manufacturing aspect. So part of your processes, internal processes, will be that we need to get these things done, and these are the kind of data that we want to keep track of. And our objective is to have, for instance, work in process of X amount, or be able to ship a product in 30 days. So these are kind of the targets we want to meet. So the internal processes will help you capture the data, measure it, and make you aligned to that. So that's one of the benefits of setting up internal processes.
So everybody knows about the scores in your team. Let's say all the employees, like they know about it. Let's say if you guys are gonna perform, if you're gonna make like 1,000 points this month, you're gonna get bonus, right? Or pretty much.
Yeah, well, so what you want to say is that each different teams would have to know what their objectives are. So for instance, financial guys would have to know we need to collect money in 45 days. There's no point somebody in manufacturing knowing that they can't actually do anything about that. So someone that can actually action on something, they should be aware of that, and you need to drive accountability in the organization. So if your goals are to develop a new product or ship something, then that has to be articulated. Actually, it has to be done by someone, and they have to be held accountable. So they need to know what the target is, so you can actually hold them accountable towards that, and they need to know what the target is. And they should be able to do something about that. So for instance, if someone in R&D needs to develop a product, they should know what stage should it be at this time. That becomes their indicator. And if you're a shipping product or manufacturing, could have a sense of that, or service guys, like customer service, need to respond within 4 hours. Now that's your target. Now you can measure towards that and see if you're achieving that or not. But the teams that can impact that criteria or that indices should be aware of that, and should have tools of means of getting there and be able to measure and get you there.
And would you put it in the employee agreement? Like every single person has to know about it by just signing the agreement? part of the game?
Yeah, we don't actually sign an agreement of this nature. We do communicate to the company as a whole or that team to say this is our goal that we're trying to achieve and why we need to achieve that. We need to understand the reason behind that and how does it relate to the company as a whole. So they need to understand their role in the company and what's the criteria. Then on an individual performance basis, they should be aware of what the goals are. Then when we evaluate them at the end of the year, are we achieving that? So there is a kind of agreement in that sense, but not a formal agreement. But these goals have to be communicated because as Sarah was saying, if you're head of the organization, we actually can't do that much. You know, we got limited things you can do. So this work is being articulated by teams of people. So they need to know what the goals are and the fact that you're measuring them against that. And they should be able to impact that criteria or what the output is.
Thank you.
For someone that is not too familiar with business but actually wants to start their own, what is best? To create your own business plan or to hire someone else to actually do it for you?
Okay, you have to do it yourself. There's no doubt about that. I think hiring someone, it's not something you can outsource because you're going to get and if that's the plan, you can go on the internet and download one today. You don't need to hire someone. So the objective is not to have a business plan for sake of having one. Okay, so you need a plan initially to get funded, and they have to be written in a more formal sense. Other people can read that. But it has to come from yourself. Okay, and that's what Sarah was speaking very heavily towards. If it's a canned thing, people look at that and in 10 seconds know things don't jive. I mean, different aspects have to glue together. That makes sense, and these business plans have to flow from your vision, what you expect to be, to your product, to your customers, how much will they pay, to your financials tied to your profitability. These things have to be all interwoven and tied together. How much you spend on marketing has to come out of your financials. These all have to be tightly integrated, and getting someone to write one won't take you any further. And even if you got someone to write it, you actually have to articulate that now. So that should come right from your heart or almost your mind, if you will, to articulate that fully. You certainly, if you're not familiar with a formal business plan that requires funding, you certainly get help from people to help you reduce it or get an accountant to do the balance sheet, whatnot. That's perfectly okay, but the basic kind of concepts have to come from yourself. If they're not, whoever going in front of will know that 30 seconds what you're talking about. You have to keep in mind your business plan and yourself will eventually go into someone in front of like Ron Israel, the gentleman that was here. And with his level of expertise, he'll know in 10 minutes if you know what you're talking about or someone else make it up, they'll know immediately. And so if you haven't developed it and kind of articulated the whole thing and interwoven it together, it'll become very, very clear. That helps.
Could you recommend any tools for tracking and measuring the KPIs? I believe someone asked about that.
Yeah. The key, we don't actually use any sophisticated software ourselves, but we tend to use a lot of graphical. So we just put them in Excel to say, for instance, if you're tracking, I don't know, sales per month or number of new customers, then you would define a predefined criteria that you want to have 2 customers a month or 1 customer a month, whatever the case is. And track yourself towards that, did we get that or not? So the key thing is not a tool per se, but to defining what is that you want to measure. Okay? It could be a new customer, it could be retention of a customer, or it could be a service delivery part, aspect to it. And so knowing what that is. Second is, what is your criteria that you're trying to achieve? Then put that in some format that you can understand. So if you use a software, so much better. If you want to use Excel, a piece of paper, it doesn't really matter. But the key thing is to know what it is that you want to measure and have that predefined what that number is and track yourself towards that on a monthly basis.
What exactly do you mean by initiative in your scorecard chart? Can you also use an example?
Yes, sorry, I didn't understand.
The initiative in your chart, in your scorecards chart,
Yeah.
the 4, there's objective measures, initiatives, for objectives, measures, targets, and initiatives. Yeah, the one just before.
One here?
Yeah. So
So you got the financial aspect, customer aspects of it, learning and growth, which refers to your organizational capabilities going forward, and internal business processes that are helping you drive that.
Right, and within each of these categories are four, basically four main points.
Yeah.
Objectives, measure, target, and initiative. So by initiative, you mean what you're actually doing to achieve your targets? That's
Yeah,
what-
so in each one of the, for instance, financial customer service, you'll have some sort of key performance indicator that helps you point towards what is it that you're looking for. And it could well be that you want to initiate a develop a review process or initiate a marketing strategy to get customers.
Right.
With the
That's what you mean by
Yeah,
initiatives.
yeah. It
Okay.
could well be that new initiatives that you need to take towards.
Okay.
So for instance, if you're running out of funding, initiative could be you need to raise more money or need to get bank financing and whatnot.
Right.
But the key thing is that look at, these are the four major elements that should be looked at as a combination, not in isolation. And these four aspects will give you kind of picture of the company as a whole that you can look at on a monthly basis.
Any more questions? Thank you, Kris.
Short.